Welcome to the Texas Talks podcast. I'm your host, Brad Swale. Today, I'm joined by Representative Caroline Fairley of District 87. Representative Fairley is not only the youngest member, but also the first Generation Z member of the Texas House. I'm excited to talk to her. Representative Fairley, how are you?
I'm great. How are you, Brad?
I'm doing well. I'm excited to talk to you. It's always a pleasure to get to speak with you, and I've spoken with many of your colleagues up there at the Capitol and many others, and it's going to be. I'm stoked. It's going to be great. So I did a very brief intro there. Youngest member, first Gen Z member. I'm sure there's more to you than just those two things. Tell us a little bit more about you and your district.
Totally. Well, thanks for having me on today. I represent District 87. So it's a part of Amarillo and then all the way up. It's rural Texas. So I have 8 counties that I represent. Amarillo is really the city in that, and then the rest is rural. So ag is huge. Farming and ranching is a really big part of the district. I'm so glad I get to represent them. What's amazing about my district is it's very conservative, and it is a blessing to get to represent a district that matches with your actual convictions and beliefs. Like, what a game changer when you're voting on legislation and making decisions that those match up pretty equally. And so I'm thankful that I get this opportunity to represent that part of Texas.
Yeah, for sure. I hadn't planned on asking you about this, but you're mentioning North Texas and rural and everything like that. And I've talked to a lot of your colleagues. And I think even Greg Abbott tweeted this out just the other day about water being very important to Texas. And I'm wondering what your thoughts on, we're going to get into some other stuff too, but just if you have some brief thoughts on, is that something your constituents are worried about? Is the water in Texas, are you guys doing okay up there?
It is a huge concern. I mean, when I campaigned for the last year, that was one of the biggest issues that came up was, what are we going to do about water? How do we handle it? What do we do? And so I spent a lot of time researching. Now, I will tell you, I am not the expert on water, but I am thankful that we have a lot of people who are experts. I'm actually on natural resources this session, and I'm glad to have a seat at the table and really dive deep into what is the future of water. Because the concern really is, we're not going to fix the issue in the next 2 to 3 years. This is what do we look in the next 20, 30 years? And I plan hopefully to be here in Texas in the next 20, 30 years and advocate for those issues. I'm thankful Senator Perry, he is leading the issue on this. And look, Texas has the funds and we have the resources. We just need to make sure we allocate them in the best way to find solutions in conserving water and making sure that Texans have access to drinkable, usable water.
Yeah, for sure. So circling back to, as I mentioned in the intro, you're the youngest member of the Texas House. You're the first Gen Z member of the Texas House. I'm sure that gives you some unique perspectives compared to many of your colleagues. Not saying one way is better than the other, but can you just sort of describe, we're going to talk about some of the bills that you've authored this session that I think may be informed by your age and your generation. What is it like being the first Gen Z member of the Texas House?
Well, Brad, I'll be totally direct about this. I don't really think, I'm a Gen Z. I'm so glad I'm the youngest person in the Texas House. It's pretty special. That's great. I think I could even pass as a staffer on most days. I look old enough to be maybe 18. But I'll tell you, I don't really think of myself as a Gen Zer. I ran for office. I got elected by my constituents to deliver results and to make sure that I'm effectively communicating the things that we need to have done and also pass policy that's also good for the district. And so though I guess it's amazing that I'm a Gen Z in the Texas House, I think my perspective is a little bit different in some of those things. Like most women in my generation lean more liberal than conservative. And so being able to have that seat at the table that has a conservative perspective and believes that we have to work also across the aisle on certain legislation. Like a lot of bills are more rural versus urban than maybe Republican versus Democrat. And so those relationships are so key. And we live in an environment now where sometimes we're so polarized on our political beliefs that we forget to come back to the kitchen table and have conversations about policy that does impact Texans. And so I am thankful from a younger perspective to be able to have a seat at the table. I think I think the older generations have a lot of wisdom and life experience that I want to learn from and glean, their perspective. But I also think the next generation, we're stepping up, especially conservatives, to have a voice about what we want the future of Texas and our country to look like.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not that much older than you. I am a little bit older than you. I want to
Are
talk to
you
you.
Gen Z?
Huh?
Or are you Gen Z or millennial?
I think that I'm definitely a millennial. I don't know if I would be considered an elder millennial or not. I'm
And
39. I was born in 85, so I don't know what that is. I know it's millennial. I just don't know where on the spectrum of millennial I am. I grew up with the telephone on the kitchen wall. That's where I was.
okay, okay, yeah, yeah.
Um, So, my question was, talking about the kitchen table, coming back to the kitchen table, the issues being more urban versus rural, that sort of thing, that push and pull, not so much. There's certainly conservative versus liberal as well. But, you mentioned that many of the women in your generation, Generation Z, are much more liberal. I'm wondering if that was, I mean, maybe the area that you grew up in wasn't quite as pronounced, but I'm wondering what are the conversations like, you being a conservative, not only a conservative but an elected conservative, at the kitchen table with your peers of your same age? Is there, do y'all put the politics aside, or is there some tension? Do y'all butt heads?
This is a great question, Brad. So I would say it's a little bit mixed of both. Like I've definitely at this point had a lot of opportunities to get to speak to younger women or other people in my generation. And I think the thing that they resonate the most with, whether they're more liberal or more conservative, is this idea that we have to have conversations. We have to keep talking. We have to keep, even healthily debating issues. Like that is so crucial. One, to just a democratic belief in democracy, that we have differing views, but we can have a healthy discussion and debate about it. I will also say, like, I spoke with some college students a while back, and most of them were liberal. Like it was like 20 college students, and they were all liberal, and I'm up there talking about my conservative values, and I can tell they're like, oh my goodness, like we haven't met a Gen Z who's conservative. And but I will tell you, there was this mutual respect about being able to explain, this is why I am pro-life. This is why I am for cutting taxes, and I'm for smaller government, and this is why I'm pro-family and pro-mom, and all of these beliefs, without being an extreme or being aggressive, but communicating, these are the convictions that I believe in. And let's talk about what your beliefs are. And let's see, why did you come up with those? Why do you believe those things? And so I've been thankful with this new job of being an elected official, having those conversations, engaging. But I will say it's mostly been positive. I mean, the amount of people that have really said, wow, I'm inspired that a young person ran for office and put her hat in the ring and stood up for these beliefs. Because what really people want, they want to know, what do you believe and what do you stand for? And what's the conviction behind what you believe? And can you articulate that well, and also have healthy debate? And what does that look like? But so far it's been overwhelmingly more positive with my generation than maybe I thought it would be.
Sure. And I think it would be, I mean, you're certainly you're one version of the future of the Republican Party. There's a lot of people your age and my age that, they're coming into their own, getting leadership positions like you, getting elected. In your opinion, being a part of that new generation of Republican conservative elected officials, what's your perception of the future of the Republican Party? What's the Gen Z perception of the future of the Republican Party? Like, how do you wrap in, you mentioned some of the things, why are you pro mom, pro life, cutting taxes, all of that stuff? How does that all sort of fit into the future of the Republican Party for you?
Well, I have a lot of thoughts about the future of the Republican Party, which I'm sure over the next 10, 20 years will evolve and change, and I'll say, oh, I
Sure.
got that wrong, or I agree with that. But
That's good.
right
That's
now,
the best perspective to have. You should be open and flexible, of course.
exactly. And also it's amazing how much just the political atmosphere can change like that. There's so, whether whoever's president, whoever's in power in our state, like all of those things, they shift, which is just fascinating to me about politics. But when I look at the future of the Republican Party, one of the things I think about a lot is this idea that we sometimes believe that if you're not 100% with me, then you can't be with me at all. And I don't believe in that way of thinking. Now, I don't think for 1 second we should waver from our conservative values that make us the Republican Party, which is those elements I mentioned earlier and more. And I don't think we should waver from those first principles. I don't think we should ever give up on them or compromise them. But there is this belief that having conversation and relation with other people is growing the Republican Party. But when you have this idea that if you're not totally with me on this issue 100%, then you can't be with me on any other, it's not realistic, and it's also, I don't think, very productive. And you see that in the Texas House. You see that and even at the federal level, the polarization and extreme on both sides, and I think those will kind of always exist in politics. But when you look at Texas and growing the political party and the Republican Party, I think the more we're divided, the more room it gives the Democrats to take over. And I wonder, like, how much more productive and how much more we get done if we were willing to say, we all agree on these policies, and we all agree on these beliefs, and instead of trying to trip each other out, and
Yep.
and not saying, because the guy I voted for speaker didn't win, I can't work with you. Like, that's not realistic. I don't think it's productive, and I think that we would be way more effective if we came to the table and we said, let's find some common ground. And as Republicans, let's come together for the future of Texas, for the next generation. Like, speaking from a Gen Z perspective, I can tell you, I don't think my generation likes the polarization and the extremists. And again, we shouldn't waver from those conservative principles for a second.
Yep.
But there's a way to do it that I think is better than sometimes how we see it now.
Sure, absolutely. Well, let's talk about some of your authored bills here. You have House Bill 1481, which is prohibiting personal electronic devices in schools. I assume that means cell phones. It could be another things too, I guess.
At this point, it could be 100 different things. Who knows?
I mean, in a few years, it's going to be a Neuralink, I guess.
It probably will. That's
I don't
good.
know. I don't know if you can remove those when you enter school, but we'll have to figure out a different legislation at that point. So, I know this is a big talk, not only in Texas, but really across the nation. I think there's a big national conversation happening about cell phones in schools. Even though I am on the younger side of things, I didn't have the cell phone that I had in school was not an iPhone. And the best thing I could do is play Snake. And I'm sure many of my listeners out there are familiar with that and loved that moment. But there was no social media. There was no, texting it was very basic, right? But you grew up with probably an iPhone in high school.
I did.
So why is this important? What was is this drawing from your personal experience? What's going on?
Totally. Well, a few things. One, I think I got an iPhone when I was probably 17 in high school, but I grew up in the generation where this was what kids are raised on. This is what they're exposed to. And so I do have, I think, a unique perspective on the positive and negative effects that social media can have. But I'll tell you, after I won my primary, I had a school teacher ask me in Texas to come look at their school and come sit in their classroom and just see what happens in their classroom. And she's like, you're going to love it. It's going to be amazing. And I remember sitting in the classroom for 45 minutes and kids were on their phone the whole time. I mean, it was disruptive. The teacher had no classroom management. The kids had their laptop set up with their iPhone behind the screen with their AirPods, watching a movie. And it was, I kind of was baffled, frankly, because I thought, oh my heavens, like, there's no classroom management. The kids are not focusing. They're not learning. Yeah. They're on their phone the whole 45 minutes. And really from that idea and reading Anxious Generation, the reality is that, in Anxious Generation, Jonathan Knight, he mentions how the constant use of social media, it is leading to a mental health crisis in which we're already seeing firsthand. I mean, Generation Z is more anxious and worried. They're less focused. They're more distracted. And the idea of this bill really comes from, it's simple. We want phones up in a way so that kids can focus and so that teachers can teach. And we bring it back to the fundamentals of kids are going to school to learn math and science and reading and communicate with their classmates and work with their teachers. And that's really what this bill is about.
When you say the cell phone's up and away, I mean, I assume that could also mean a personal iPad or a personal computer. I mean, obviously I can text from my computer, all day long. Or search, scroll through, doom scroll Twitter all day. But what does that look like? What do they do? How does they just put it in their locker? Is it not allowed? And what is this ideal situation? Do they leave it at home, leave it in their car? Where
So
is it?
right Yeah. So right now, where we have it is we're trying to keep as much local control as possible. But what we're saying is during school hours, the phones have to be up in a way in a secure location. And so that may look like they need to be in a box at the front of the classroom and they may be in a pouch. Right now, we're figuring out there's some funding to help support the ISDs and saying, hey, you could purchase a secure pouch to put the phone up, and that way they would go in something that essentially just they can't get on their phone at all. But the idea is that we don't want kids to be distracted by, being able to pull them out secretly. But yeah, they have to be up and away in a secure location where they can't get them.
Yeah. So have you received any sort of pushback or support from, I don't know, parents or teachers or administrators, or I don't know, the Texas Association of Superintendents or whatever those different organizations are? Have they reached out to you with, kudos or how dare yous?
We've had majority of people say, wow, we need this. Like, this is so important. I mean, several other states have passed this. About 60-70% of parents agree that phones should be banned, and not be on school campuses during the educational hours. And so the support has been really there. I think the only pushback would be, which I'm happy to talk through, would be just security. Like, if there's a school shooter, we've had parents say, what do we do in those cases? Which we've typically said, look, studies show too that when a school shooter is at your high school or middle school, the last thing you want is your seventh grader on their phone videotaping, calling 911, blocking up the phone line of communication, or even calling their parents. And really, those school districts should have a proper process to be able to communicate with parents as soon as possible if that happens, because of course we want our parents to be involved. We want them to know what's happening if there is an emergency. But those school districts, one, we've operated without phones hundreds of years and we're just fine in those situations. So we just want to make sure that we make sure that parents do feel confident that those ISDs are having processes in place to communicate. But you probably don't want your sixth grader calling 911 during a school shooter, blocking up the communication lines when those are happening. And the thing is that other school districts who have implemented this, like I know one school district in Amarillo did do this, and it's been really positive. I mean, studies show that test scores have increased when kids were not on their phones during the school hours. I know one parent had told me that when they banned phones, she said the cafeteria, it was louder. And she said because kids, they weren't scrolling on their phone. They were forced to communicate with their classmates and have conversations. And so the overwhelming support has been all positive. There's been a few things working through, but so far it's been very positively received.
So the cafeterias are louder now. Are you concerned about the return of the cafeteria food fight?
That might be something that we'll have to weigh, but I don't know. That'll be a tough one to argue.
Yeah,
I might be willing to trade off a food fight for kids looking at their phones down
sure.
in
I don't. Maybe the custodian might not be happy about it, but we'll figure
between you.
something out.
Yeah.
As a parent myself, I think about this and I struggle, of course. I mean, my oldest is only 10, but I struggle, of course, about when and how much is appropriate and everything like that. I'm happy to report he does not have a cell phone. So, but I think the counter argument there is often, well, that's the world they're going to be living in, and they need to get used to it and learn how to use it responsibly. And that's your job as a parent, teach them how to use it responsibly. How, I can kind of see both sides, right? I'm not going to get them a cell phone today, but I know that some people do get their kids cell phones at a young age, and they say, well, that's just the way the world is now. They've got to learn how to do it. They're
Hmm.
holding them back if you don't let them get that experience. What do you say to that?
Well, I would say, I think my biggest argument to that would be, I understand you. You want to equip your kids to be aware of what's happening in the world. I would say you want them to be innocent but not naive.
Sure.
So of course we want them to be aware and be smart and aware of what's really happening. And you could say social media is one of them, and say we want kids to be equipped on how to handle this. But I would also say, like, I grew up obviously in this generation of my friends having phones and me maybe not having one. And in eighth grade, my parents gave me a flip phone. And so I was able to still communicate and be involved in a way that felt like I kind of had a little bit similar experience, but not the same. But also a seventh grader being on Instagram, I would argue, is just not good for them at all. I mean, studies show even for females, like it is so harmful for their awareness of their confidence, of how they view themselves, of seeing, social media influencers saying you have to look or be a certain way. And so I would say there's just a time and place for when you expose them to that. And I know a lot of studies say probably 16, 17 is the time that they can appropriately have a device and just have monitors around the parent being involved in what does that look like and what's appropriate and what's not. And it's the same idea that, there's pornography out there. You don't let your kid look at pornography in seventh grade because it's out there. Like you have guardrails to protect them. And so I would argue that parents, they're designed to protect their kids, and we want them to grow and experience and learn and make mistakes. But we also want to make sure that we don't expose them to things that are harmful to their mental health, and that they just can't practically carry at that age. I think there's an age that probably they can start to learn, how do I monitor social media well and make sure I do have self-control when I'm looking at it. And like, I remember I had to put my phone up at 8 p.m. at night and I couldn't be on it at night, and that, but I still got to have the cell phone. And so there were healthy guidelines that created boundaries where I had freedom, but not too much freedom where it maybe was unhealthy.
Sure. So I want to talk again about another bill of yours, HB 2551, which relates to this to sexually explicit visual material.
Yes.
You mentioned pornography just a minute ago, and yes, you're right. I wouldn't want a seventh grader to be looking at pornography just because it's out there. That would be a nightmare. So what is this bill trying to achieve, and who is it trying to protect?
Exactly. Well, this bill, I am so excited about this bill. So essentially what it is it's expanding the definition of deep fake. So right now this passed in the Senate, and there's a little loophole. So we're making sure we're expanding it. It used to just be videos. And what we want to make sure is all deep fake material, whether it's photographs or AI, that those are considered, if they're pornographic, criminal offense.
Yeah.
And the reality is 98% of deep fakes, they are pornographic. And out of that 98%, 99% are targeted to women. And sometimes you see it as this like pornographic revenge is what happens. And so at the end of the day, we just want to protect women. I mean, we don't want women to be victims of pornography or AI deepfakes or any of that. And there's an amazing thing about AI that I love. I use ChatGPT. It's so helpful. I love where it's headed and where it's going. But of course, when women are being victimized and put in situations that are inappropriate and abusive, we want to protect them at all cost.
Yeah. So I assume that this issue is sort of in your eyes was brought on by AI. There was Photoshop before AI, of course. But it does seem like something that's more pervasive nowadays, even though the technology was there. Maybe it's just more difficult. It's just easier to do nowadays?
I think really just the use of AI has really increased that number a lot. That's it at the end of the day.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's probably true. I'm sure AI, like I said, it's just made it so much easier.
So easy.
Yeah. So, I'm wondering, obviously this is geared towards sexually explicit visual material, photos, videos, whatever. It could be celebrities, it could be, some college friend, it could be anybody really. But should this go further than just the sexually explicit visual material, do you think? Or do we do it piecemeal, like sort of what you're doing? I mean, certainly there's going to be a time in politics where, you, Representative Caroline Farrelly, some Twitter troll is going to create a video of you saying something at the podium that you didn't actually say, right? And it's a deep fake or whatever they want to call it at the time. So I'm wondering what your thoughts about that are.
Totally. Well, I think I'm curious to see where this goes, because I have seen, you see those videos of President Trump or whoever saying something or acting in something, and it's clear that it's AI and it's not real. And I do think that there is a line about when that's crossed and how far that goes. And I assume we will see at some point that be abused in a way that's not good for politicians or people running for office, and even in other areas. So I don't know yet about specific legislation that would look like. You want to be careful because you want to allow it to grow. I believe in free market. I believe in allowing things to be competitive and seeing where it goes. And then seeing how do we need to pivot and change. And so I think, of course, at the end of the day, we don't want deep fake or pornographic material out there that's false about women. I mean, full stop. And even if it's men, women, boys, girls, whoever it is, we don't want that out there. And I think the biggest part is keeping a close eye on what does AI look like in the future in other realms, and being careful as a lawmaker what that looks like on what you regulate and what you don't. And so I don't have an answer on that directly, but just curious on looking at where does that look like in the next 10 years.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I could easily see. You're right. It is pretty obvious now. I've seen videos of whatever President Trump. It's obvious to me that it's AI. It just has that
Mhm.
certain sound that's not quite right, and I could pick it
Yeah.
up. But
Did you see that one with President Trump and Zelensky on? Did you see that one on Twitter?
I've seen many of them. Yes,
Yeah, and some of those you can tell you're like, obviously this isn't real, but some of those are
sure.
kind of they're interesting to watch.
But I think that there are some that are pretty sophisticated out there that I think that there's a certain percentage of the population that would not know the difference between, that sounds like something that that person would say or not say. I don't, and then you see the other one, maybe you think the real one's the deep fake, and who knows at that point. But this being related specifically for sexually explicit visual material, I think is a great place to start. That does harm people in a very unique way, especially harms women in a unique way. Um, I'm wondering if this sort of stems again from your generational experience, being concerned about this. I don't know how much, older generations, I won't include millennials because we're still young, but older generations, if they might even be aware that this is a problem. Is this when you're talking to your colleagues about this sort of thing, are they aware? Are they blown away? Like, when this happens, what's going on? What are those conversations like?
So I would say for the most part, my colleagues are pretty aware, and that might be because of the political atmosphere we're in. Like I feel like this is a topic that is addressed often. I will say like when you get to your 16, 70 year olds, you do have to educate a little bit more about, this is happening, and obviously they're baffled and confused, and like you said, those AI videos that are created, there are some that are really pretty spot on and realistic that are a little kind of crazy when you watch
And
them.
I don't want to, I hate to interrupt, but I want to be clear. You mentioned earlier, you're Gen Z, but there's a lot to learn from the older generations. I'm not saying that the 70-year-olds don't know anything. Obviously,
Totally.
they'll whip me
But
good in plenty of conversation. I'm just curious, on this specific one, it seems like there might be a disadvantage.
exactly. Well, and I do think that there, but at the end of the day, most of my colleagues, they're pretty
Sure.
aware
Yeah.
of what's happening, and frankly, they want to advocate for it too because they see how much of an issue it can be, and how dangerous, and also there's a lot of pros to AI in the future of what it looks like that we want to incentivize and encourage to grow, but there's also some negative parts.
Yeah, it's technology. There's going to be some pros and cons, just like a cell phone. There's some pros and cons. You use it all day in school. That's a con, but you have Chat GPT in your hand, which is sounds like a pro. Well, I appreciate you taking the time, Representative Caroline Fairley. We talked about a little bit there. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about before we sign off?
I don't think I have anything else. Nothing else right now.
I'm sure there's plenty of going on, and you're always welcome to come back and discuss all of that. Do you have a website or social media that you wanted to plug?
I do. Fairly for Texas is on Instagram and Facebook and X. So give a follow. But
Great. Well, we'll put the links for that down in the description below. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Brad, thanks so much. Have a good day.